Okay, I've got a question for you. What's the single most important element of any piece of music? It's the rhythm. Okay, without rhythm, we can't have any music. And from a guitarist's point of view, rhythm and being able to strum and play the guitar with rhythm is absolutely essential to you being able to, sound expressive and, capable on the instrument to add color to the things that you play. But mainly, above anything else, it makes it more fun, playing the guitar in interesting ways with different rhythms. It's like, to me, that's the most fun that you can have on the guitar. It's all based around rhythm. What I wanted to do in this training series was really focus in on rhythm, and forget about chords, forget about lead guitar, forget about theory, and we're just going to focus specifically on rhythm and how we create interesting rhythms on the guitar. So before we begin, what I wanted to do is just share a concept with you that I've created, which I call the rhythm triangle. And this is how I want you to visualize things on the guitar. Okay, so we're going to imagine that there is a person here with a guitar. Okay, so let's bear with me here with my rubbish drawings. Okay, it's a guy with an enormous guitar. It's like way too big for his body, but that doesn't matter. The point is, I want you to imagine a triangle going around this person. Okay, now at the top of the triangle is timing. Okay, now bear with me, and hopefully this will make sense. Okay, so at the top of the triangle is timing, and that's where we begin. If we want to create a piece of music, give this little guy some legs. If we want to create a piece of music, then we need to have a clear sense of what the timing is around what we want to do that. So what's the tempo of the track? Are we strumming? Are our downstrokes matching the beat of the song? Very, very important. Being clear, working out the beat of a track. Everything begins with that sense of timing, and you can think of that as being in your head, or your chest. I guess it's an internal thing. But what I want you to think about for now is that's timing. That's step number one. Now, as a guitarist, step number two is over here, and this is your chord hand. We're going to call that, okay? Now, your chord hand is the second point. Okay, now that chord hand is the shapes that you're holding here. Now, it might actually not be chords. It might be notes. So you might be playing lead, or you might be playing chords, or whatever. Yeah, so we begin with timing. The next thing is what you're doing with your chord hand, the shapes, the strings you're pressing down with that hand. And then over on this side of the triangle, we have number three, which is your strumming hand. Okay, now apologies for my terrible writing, but I'm sure you get the idea. Okay, so we begin with timing, number one, then we've got our chord hand over here, and then we have our strumming hand over here. And it's important that you understand that there's a constant back and forth relationship between these two. And specifically what I'm driving at there is the chord voicings that you choose affect your rhythmic options. Okay? The chord voicings that you choose affect your rhythmic options, and vice versa. And that's a really important statement that you need to think about and be aware of when you're creating rhythms on the guitar, because really there's only so much you can do with your right hand, assuming you're right-handed. With your strumming hand, there's only so much you can do with your strumming hand, and that's based off what you're doing down at the other end of the guitar neck. I hope that's useful for you, just to sort of, be clear in your mind on how the rhythmic world works, and that it begins with timing, then it's your chord hand, and then it's your rhythmic hand. Okay, so now let's look at some specific rhythmic techniques. Okay, now you've got that framework in mind, and I want you to keep that in mind throughout this training series. We're going to look at some specific rhythmic techniques. So when we speak about rhythm, almost all of the rhythm comes from our strumming hand. Most of the time, there are some very, very few rhythmic techniques that we can do with our left hand, but they're dwarfed by the amount of rhythmic techniques that we can do with our right hand. So with our left hand down here, we're going to be mostly holding static chord shapes. If we're playing, rhythm guitar, we might be moving through scales and playing lead too, of course. But from your right hand, this is what I want you to think about it, okay? There are broadly 4 different styles of strumming, okay? And within each style of strumming, there are specific techniques. So the 4 styles are full, partial, percussive, and fingerpicking. And they're kind of 4 different distinct styles of strumming. And within each style, we have different techniques. So if we look at full strumming, for example, I'm going to pick a really simple chord progression here. I'm going to bounce back between G and C. And I'm going to give you an example of each one of those different types of rhythmic techniques. But we're going to keep the chord progression the same, because I want you to just literally just focus in on the rhythmic techniques, the right hand techniques that we're using here. Okay, so if we begin strumming this chords in a full way, it'll sound like this. Okay, now when I'm playing that, I'm strumming all of the notes of this chord. Okay, so I'm playing a bar chord here, so I'm strumming all 6 strings. And I'm really just presenting these chords in a really steady way. This is just full strumming, okay? And this is really what beginner guitarists, this is where they want to get to when they first start playing, yeah? Now for a beginner guitarist, that's great. That's where they want to get to. That's the first stage. They want to be able to present chords in a steady way and a consistent way. But of course, once we reach the point as guitarists where we can do that, we don't want to play everything in a full and steady way. We want to be able to become more articulate as musicians, develop new techniques, you know, and really what we want is variety in what we play. If we don't have that, then we sound very, very one-dimensional as a guitarist, and that's not what I want for you, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the next style of strumming, which is called partial strumming. And I want you to hear, I'll show you, but I want you to hear how this differs to the other stuff that we've looked at so far. So partial strumming is when, pretty much like it sounds, it's when we strum only a part of the chord. It's when we choose to, you know, whatever the chord voicing is, it's when we choose to deliver it in a way where we're not presenting all of the notes at once. So a really easy way to think about this is if you were playing it as fifths, for example, you know, as a power chord, then you're just playing strings 4, 5, and 6. So this becomes reduced, and it sounds like this. Yeah, it's become reduced, it's become more focused, and that allows us to create a different rhythm. You might have noticed that I was just doing downstrokes there, because that just works well when you're just focusing on that low end of the guitar. Okay, but we don't just have to play fifths. We could, if we wanted to, break the chord into groups. You may have heard me speak about this before, the concept of string grouping. This is really, really powerful. So rather than just playing all 6 strings in one strike of 6 strings at once, we can choose to focus on the low, the mid, and the high. Remember, all music is broadly, no matter what it is, it can be broken into 3 different frequency ranges of low, mid, and high, bass, mid, and treble if you prefer. And they're the controls that you'll see that allow you to EQ your amp, or, you know, a massive mixing desk, or, you know, the stereo in your car, or whatever it might be. So if we choose deliberately there to focus on the bass and the mid, now on the guitar, the bass and the treble. Now on the guitar, our treble is our thinnest 2 notes, the mid is our middle 2 notes, and the bass is our deepest 2 notes. If we choose to alternate between bass and treble, listen to how that changes things. So from full strumming, but now we're going to go bass and treble. We're going to alternate. It's got a bit more space, a bit more bounce. Now I'm going to go bass, treble, and I'm going to add a little bit of mid. What about if I go bass, 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 and then just add the treble before the chords turn around? Listen to this. Can you hear how was sprinkling in different parts of the chord there. What that gives us is a texture to what we play. All of a sudden we're not presenting the chords as just a wall of notes. There's stuff going on in there, there's texture to what we're playing. The last partial strumming technique that I want to share with you is where we arpeggiate the chords. So that's literally where we just play individual notes. And the easiest way to do this is to literally just pick single notes at random. So always begin with the root note, the G and the C in this context. But what I'm doing here is just picking individual strings, deliberately isolating them. And that gives us that twinkly, delicate kind of feeling. It creates a more gentle feel to the track. Things feel a little bit more fragile, but also it can sound a little bit more, in my opinion, it can sound a little bit more sort of cultured, because we're hearing all of the different nuance that's within that chord individually. So it creates a very, very different feel. So that's the last partial strumming technique, that we've covered here. We've spoken about string grouping, we've spoken about fifths, we've spoken about arpeggiating those chords. And remember, just one last point, when we're speaking about fifths, you can choose to arpeggiate just the fifth if you want. So that would be just the sixth and the fifth string. So we would just play. A very kind of introverted and reduced kind of feel that it creates almost a melancholy feeling. I really like that technique. And the other cool thing about that is, because there's no third in there, it can't be major or minor. So that's great, because it means from your perspective, you can use that without having to worry about what the tonality might be, whether it's major or minor. That means that shape's really, really portable. You can use that all the time, all over the fretboard. Really, really useful shape to know. Okay, let's move on to the next one of these rhythmic right hand techniques. The style that we're going to move on to now is percussive right hand guitar techniques. So far we've spoken about full and partial, and now we're going to speak about percussive. Now when we speak about percussive guitar, what we're talking about here is using the instrument almost like a drum, essentially. What we're doing, the guitar ultimately is just a piece of wood with a hole inside it, and of course that resonates the sound that the strings make. So the guitar essentially is a drum, it's a percussive instrument, but we tend not to think of that, in Western music. We tend to think of the guitar as a stringed instrument, and that's what we perceive it. But we can use the nature of the instrument there to our advantage to create some really interesting rhythms, So the most common percussive guitar technique that we use is deadening. It's where we deaden the strings when we play them. And deadening is where we use our palm to just rest on the strings, and it just deadens the sound. But if we come in and out with that deadening technique at regular intervals, then that creates rhythm. So here we go. Let's try this again. We're going to go from the G to the C, but we're going to deaden some of these strokes that we play here. So what we've got there is a bounce to the music that's appeared, because we're not just presenting the notes, we're actually thinking about creating rise and fall in the music. We do that through using deadening. Now in that scenario there, I was deadening mostly with my right hand, but we can actually deaden with our left hand as well. Listen to this. If I play this chord, listen to how it silences when I deaden it with my left hand. Did you hear how it stopped? So what happened there was I just relaxed my grip down at this end, only slightly, ever so slightly. My fingers stayed in contact with the string, but they came away. I reduced that sort of clamp with my fingers just a little, but they stay in contact with the strings, and that silences the strings completely. And of course, we can use that to our advantage when we play, because if we do that, if we relax our fingers at regular moments, then we're going to create a rhythm. So for example, if we did that on every second or fourth beat, for example, that will create a rhythm. Okay, the next percussive technique that I want to share with you here is a technique that I play all the time, which I call string slapping. And I generally do this more when I'm finger picking. But what that does is it allows us to strike the strings. So instead of going like this, up and down, our hand goes out and in. And we actually make contact with the strings. Literally, we're playing the guitar like a drum. Okay, so what's happening there is I'm using my hand to just hit the strings. But of course I'm doing that at regular intervals, which creates the rhythm. Okay, and the last family of right hand techniques that we've covered here, we've looked at full strumming, we've looked at various partial strumming techniques, and we've looked at some percussive strumming techniques. And the last one is finger picking. Now finger picking is obviously a really cool technique where we can do all of the other styles within finger picking, but it's worth thinking of it as its own separate thing because it's a very, very different technique. One of the great things about finger picking is it allows us to arpeggiate everything that we play, but it allows us to do that in a softer way. We get a different feeling of attack against the strings, and also you feel much more connected to the instrument, which I really love. So if we were going to play that same chord progression finger picking, there's thousands of ways we could pick it, but I'm just going to pick it in the way that feels most natural to me. Of course, that technique works really well with that string slapping technique. But if, we could choose to, for example, use some of the string grouping techniques. So I'm going to play bass and treble. Yeah, let's see how that sounds. Gives us a different kind of feel. So I hope you found this useful. Of course, the purpose of this video, it wasn't to teach you exactly how to do all of these techniques. Of course, that would be too much to bite off, in one lesson. The purpose of this video really was to show you these techniques and for you to see the range of right-hand rhythmic techniques that are available to you as a guitarist. Because if you don't see these things, then there is a tendency that you just repeat the regular same old strumming patterns, and that's really, really one-dimensional. It gets very boring for people. And almost all guitarists, when they kind of move from being beginner to intermediate level, they reach a plateau. Almost everybody I've ever met, they reach that plateau where everything kind of sounds the same. They feel a bit, one song doesn't necessarily sound that different to the next one, and they can feel like you're just kind of stuck in a bit of a loop. So what I wanted this video to do was say, okay, check out some of this, some of these other techniques that you can use. And the last point that I wanted to make here was all of the techniques that we've covered in this video, all of those rhythmic right-hand techniques that we've covered, they're all affected by the chord voicing that you use down at this end. Okay, so don't forget that, everything that we've done here with our strumming hand is affected and limited or, empowered in whatever respect. It's all affected by what you do down here. There are certain rhythmic techniques that you can do that are better, for example, if we play a G chord as a bar chord. And there are other techniques that are better if the G is played just as an open chord. Or we might want to play the D up here, the G chord up here. Yeah, that would give us other rhythmic options. We might want to play it up here. Yeah, there are lots of different voicings of chords that we play. And the chord voicing that you choose, there's lots of different ways we could play G. And the version of G that you choose to play, or whatever the chord might be, affects what you can do up at this end. And that's where we spoke about earlier. If I go back to my rubbish diagram that I did earlier, then you can see there's a constant back and forth between the chord hand and the strumming hand. And really that decision, that thought, decision-making process that you're going through there of, back and forth between your left hand and your right hand. That is guitar. That's the essence of becoming an intermediate to advanced guitarist. You're constantly making those decisions. So I hope that, having watched this video, you now feel like you've got a better idea of what some of those rhythmic right hand techniques are. And also, you also understand the importance of developing great chord knowledge that you can use hand in hand with all of those rhythmic right hand techniques. But what I'd like you to do now is leave a comment below that explains what part of this video was most helpful to you, or what you'd most like to develop in your own rhythmic guitar techniques. Please give us some feedback. I don't mind if it's good or bad. Just give us a reaction. Let us know what you think of this video. And of course, that will also help us know what to put in the next part of this training series. So yeah, leave a comment below, and I'll catch up with you in the next video in this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.